Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Monday. The lovely Christine and I are in the Big Apple. That's right, my friends, the communist Zoran Mamdani-run city on the East Coast. I know, just a little bit terrifying. Don't worry, my friends, we'll be back on Wednesday. On today's program, I'm going to replay an episode for you, one of the best episodes that I think I've done in the last couple of years. Considering that I've heard some rumblings about Albert Sommers, that's a name you haven't heard in a while, former Redcoat Speaker of the House, Chi-Com Som, thinking about running for Superintendent of Public Instruction, I thought we should probably remind everybody who he actually is and who a lot of his friends are. So here you go, my friends, a blast from the past.
It has a much more sinister view of this engagement. The party and its proxies aim to make Americans receptive to Beijing's form authoritarianism. And it sees that here in the United States and increasingly around the world, it can use subnational entities to circumvent America's sovereignty. The purpose of his entreaties, his outreach, is to put China in an undefeatable and invincible position.
And they do it through benign and relatively harmless sounding organizations in which people at the highest levels of Wyoming government are involved in. China, the Legislative Leadership Foundation, and the Wyoming Legislature. We've got lots to do. Come on, let's go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to this special presentation of the program. From very high above all the puerile and vacuous forms of Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly and permanently ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to this special presentation of Cowboy State Politics. It sounds almost fantastical. It sounds like this is something that couldn't happen in Wyoming. That members of the Wyoming legislature and other elected officials in our great state, with or without their knowledge, have become involved with a Chinese-influenced organization. Honestly, and when I heard about this, it sounded a lot like one of those cheap spy novels that you pick up in an airport. But I can tell you what you're about to hear in this episode is absolutely the truth. To avoid burying the lead, as I am so often accused of, members of the Wyoming legislature have been and are involved in a nationwide organization with deep, deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party. This is the same story that I and the Independence Network have been covering for at least the last couple of weeks. In preparation of this story, I spoke with numerous county chairmen in the state of Wisconsin because a lot of this story about the State Legislative Leaders Foundation goes right back to Madison and the state of Wisconsin. I also interviewed a retired Supreme Court justice from Wisconsin, as well as one of their state representatives. Some of what I'm going to bring you today comes from emails obtained from the Hunter Biden laptop. And just to tell you the lengths I went to get you this information, I had a plane ticket and hotel reservations booked to go meet a source that was going to talk to me about the State Legislative Leaders Foundation. Unfortunately, at least it is my personal opinion, that somebody got to that source, and I was unable to do an interview in person. When I tell you that some of what I'm going to bring you today involves deep, deep corruption at the national, at the international, and at the state level, I'm not joking. To catch you up, the initial reporting that I and our pal Joey Correnti and the Independence Network brought you is that members of the Wyoming legislature have been involved with the State Legislative Leaders Foundation, an organization that has ties to the Chinese Communist Party. That Wyoming Speaker of the House, Albert Sommers, sits on the board of directors of the State Legislative Leaders Foundation. To be clear, Nothing in our initial reporting said that Albert Sommers was involved with the Chinese or even knew about the Chinese, only that he sits on the board of directors of an organization with deep and long-standing ties to the Chinese Communist Party through a couple of their influence peddling groups. The reality is that there's very little that happens inside of China that doesn't involve the Chinese Communist Party. So, on today's program, I'm going to do three things for you. First, I'm going to show you why the Wyoming media has been misleading you, or at the very least, is absolutely negligent in their reporting, or they are blatantly covering for members of the Wyoming legislature and Wyoming government. I'm going to prove to you the ties that the State Legislative Leaders Foundation has to the Chinese Communist Party, and finally, I'm going to show you how deep this goes in the state of Wyoming. So let's get going. I began this morning's program with a couple of excerpts from a speech delivered by then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to the Wisconsin legislature in 2020. Now, you might think it's curious that the U.S. Secretary of State is delivering a speech to a state legislature in, of all places, Wisconsin. But like I told you, this whole story of the State Legislative Leaders Foundation goes all the way back to Madison, Wisconsin, and their Speaker of the House, Robin Vos. Robin Vos is the vice chairman of the State Legislative Leaders Foundation. You can find his picture and his title on the very same website that shows our Speaker of the House, Albert Sommers, is on the board of directors for the State Legislative Leaders Foundation. And by the way, all of the articles that I'm going to mention during today's special presentation are available at cowboystatepolitics.com on the show content page. I encourage you to go read them for yourself. And that guy, my friends, Robin Vos, has very close ties to the Chinese Communist Party. So let me start by replaying a portion of Mike Pompeo's speech. Pay close attention, because what he says is not only important to the United States, it is absolutely pertinent to Wyoming.
But what happened here in Wisconsin is happening all across the world. It's happening all across the United States. It's happening in state houses all across America. In February of this year, I delivered a set of remarks to the National Governors Association about Chinese Communist Party influence operations right here inside the United States of America. And then subsequently, I organized a group, National Security Advisor O'Brien, FBI Director Chris Wray, Attorney General Bill Barr, have all talked about this same set of challenges that we face here in the United States. I want to distinguish, importantly, two things. First, look, plenty of countries try to influence our politics and our culture, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not worried about the Alliance Francaise or the National Italian American Organization or an Irish group. They're fundamentally different than what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. It has a much more sinister view of this engagement. The party and its proxies aim to make Americans receptive to Beijing's form authoritarianism. Now, I use this language carefully. I talk about the Chinese Communist Party because I have a second distinction I want to draw, which is between that party and the people of China, between the leaders of China and those who want to live in China as free peoples, at peace and prosperity, and take care of their families in the same way that we all do here in the United States. Let me give you another data point on the Chinese Communist Party's aims. In August, General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, told a group of government economists and sociologists in Beijing, quote, "We must actively develop cooperation with all countries, regions, and enterprises willing to cooperate with us, including states, localities, and enterprises inside the United States." As the Secretary of State and as the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, let me translate. She knows that the federal government is pushing back against the Chinese Communist Party here in the United States and its malign influence, and it sees that here in the United States and increasingly around the world, it can use subnational entities to circumvent America's sovereignty. He thinks local leaders may well be the weak link. For him, when he uses the word cooperation and opening up, he means that the Chinese Communist Party wants to create arrangements that benefit the Chinese Communist Party. We know this because for decades, the Chinese Communist Party deployed friendly language while stealing from our innovators, property, jobs, wealth from here in the United States. We know that they built their military strength and that they have co-opted elites all around the world. Later, in that same set of remarks, General Secretary Xi said that, in fact, he explicitly confirms that the purpose of his entreaties, his outreach, is to put China in an undefeatable and invincible position. His words, not mine. The Chinese Communist Party views itself as the true vanguard of Marxist-Leninist thought, which proposes that communist countries like theirs must struggle and prevail against capitalist nations like ours. This isn't the Cold War. This is different in kind, to be sure. I was a young soldier. I patrolled the border between East and West Germany. This is different. It's why we have to have a conversation in our state legislatures about this China and this China challenge. And it's important here in Wisconsin as it is in Washington.
There's a lot more to Secretary Pompeo's speech, and you really should go watch the entire thing. There's a couple of key things that he mentioned. The first is that the Chinese government is absolutely trying to infiltrate our state legislatures. And the second thing, and you're going to hear this phrase a lot during this episode, is subnational organizations. What that means is state legislatures, county and city government, and other political subdivisions. If you listen to the rest of Secretary Pompeo's speech, he even mentions school boards and PTA organizations. So we're not dealing with anything small or meaningless. The story we're talking about this morning has reverberations all the way to Washington, D.C. Now let's talk about the Wyoming media's response to our initial reporting on the State Legislative Leaders Foundation, because it's going to play into a lot of what's going to happen later on today's report. To the cow pie, in an article entitled Albert Sommers Calls Claim He's Working with Chinese Communists Ridiculous. Written by, of course, none other than Trotsky Wolfson. On a personal note, this is a perfect example of how Leo Wolfson earned the nickname Trotsky. The title of the article is interesting because in our initial reporting, no one accused Speaker Sommers of actually being a Chinese spy or working with the Chinese. The only thing we said is he's on the board of directors with an organization that has significant and deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party. As far as Albert Sommers is concerned, there are three possibilities. The first one is that he doesn't know that the State Legislative Leaders Foundation has anything to do with the Chinese Communist Party, that he's a willing dupe in this entire thing. Now, that in and of itself would be concerning if it were true. It would mean that he inadvertently dragged the state of Wyoming into a relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, it would mean in an attempt to pad his resume, he didn't even do his research into who the people were that he was crawling into bed with. The second possibility is that Albert Sommers knew about the Chinese relationship with the State Legislative Leaders Foundation, but he didn't care. That's quite a bit worse than the first option, because that would mean he's absolutely only interested in what helps Albert Sommers. And the third terrible possibility is that Albert Sommers absolutely knows about all the Chinese connections to the SLLF, and he's in favor of them. In a bit of generosity, and giving Albert Sommers the benefit of the doubt, I don't think that third option is the truth. Quoting from Trotsky's article, the newest conspiracy, this isn't a conspiracy, I'm about to bring you dead-on facts, but anyway, the newest conspiracy in Wyoming politics involves House Speaker Albert Sommers and an alleged connection, it's not alleged, it's absolutely true, with the Communist Party. Rumors have been building, mostly over social media, about Sommers' role as board member for the State Legislative Leaders Foundation, a nonpartisan public policy group that had past relations with the Chinese group connected to the CCP. They aren't past relations, but I'll get to that a little bit later. The latest of these interactions happened at least a few years before Sommers joined the group, and there's no evidence that they are ongoing or have resumed since he joined the board last fall. No evidence, Trotsky says. We'll see about that. But it's the next paragraph that I find particularly offensive. And on a personal note, I thought about demanding a retraction from the Cowboy State Daily, but then I realized it would be a heck of a lot more fun to just prove that everything they're saying is absolutely wrong. Or should I say that they are absolutely covering for Albert Sommers and anyone else involved in the SLLF. And I quote, "But that didn't stop one of the state Senate District 14 Republican primary opponents, Laura Pearson, from sharing a post from a conservative Wyoming political podcast. Why don't you just admit it, Trotsky, that it's Cowboy State politics, that parroted claims by other far-right Republicans that Sommers is somehow linked to the CCP because of his position on the board of the State Legislative Leaders Foundation. Hey, Trotsky, nothing was parroted. That episode was absolutely documented, as well as this one is going to be. You can send a personal apology and print a retraction right after you listen to this episode." The rest of the article goes on to say very much the same thing, that all of this is made up, that there's nothing to see here, and pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Remember the key phrase from this article. The latest of these interactions happened at least a few years before Sommers joined the group, and there's no evidence that they are ongoing or have resumed since he joined the board last fall. No evidence. There's one more little paragraph that's important out of Trotsky's article, and listen to this. Quote, "Stephen Lackus, president of SLLF, told the Cowboy State Daily on Monday that his organization has no ongoing relationship of any kind with the Chinese People's Association or ever has with the Chinese Communist Party." So according to Stephen Lackus, the SLLF has never had a relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. We'll see about that. Perhaps Trotsky should have asked some other sources, or, at the very least, done a Google search of Mr. Stephen Lackus. But the media and Albert Sommers' defense didn't stop there. Sommers apparently is so worried about this Chinese connection, as he should be, that he published a piece on his own website. And I quote, "Any suggestions that the SLLF is influenced by foreign governments, including the People's Republic of China, are categorically false and in fact laughable. The SLLF operates with complete independence, guided solely by the goal of advancing democratic governance and public service excellence." End quote. Frankly, that's not true at all, or Albert Sommers has no idea what he's talking about. And Albert Sommers didn't stop there. He then took to his Facebook page, and I quote, "I called up the founder and head guy at SLLF and asked if he or SLLF ever had a connection to Hunter Biden or Chinese communists. He said never. He said that organization held a legislative leaders conference in China in the early 2000s. He is a good man, and I believe him. I repeat, this is made-up BS." End quote. Couple of things with this post. Remember that the head guy at SLLF is Stephen Lackus. Remember that name. And secondly, that Albert says they had a conference in China in the early 2000s. But that wasn't the only one, and there's a whole bunch of stuff after the early 2000s that I'm going to tell you about. There's another Facebook post from Albert, and it says, quote, "The State Legislative Leaders Foundation is a great organization that fosters leadership through civility and relationship building. I am proud to serve on the board of directors alongside other Republican speakers from Wisconsin, West Virginia, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Arkansas." That's really important. Albert Sommers is proud to serve alongside the Wisconsin Speaker of the House. His name is Robin Vos. That's the guy that then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo went to Wisconsin to talk to. It's because of him that Mike Pompeo went to Wisconsin, and because of everything that Robin Vos was doing with the Chinese Communist Party through the State Legislative Leaders Foundation. So remember that during the course of this episode, Albert Sommers is proud to serve alongside of Robin Vos. Aside from all of his Chinese connections, Robin Vos is also the author of a giant pay-to-play scheme in the Wisconsin legislature. He set up what is known as the Stronger Wisconsin Fund, and it basically works like this. If you get elected in Wisconsin to the state legislature, specifically the House, it is customary, and put customary in quotation marks, that you pay $10,000 towards the Stronger Wisconsin Fund. And if you don't, you're not going to be doing much of anything in the Wisconsin legislature. You're not going to have a committee. You're definitely not going to have a chairmanship. And good luck getting any of your legislation on the floor. Because, of course, all of that is controlled by Robin Vos. Several county chairmen in the state of Wisconsin told me that if you even want a meeting with Robin Vos about a legislative matter or otherwise, you have to have what is referred to as the Friends of Robin Vos pin, which comes with a price tag of $500. If you don't have one of those pins on your lapel, you're not getting a meeting. Now tell me if anything I'm about to describe sounds at all familiar with what's happening in the Wyoming legislature with the Wyoming caucus. The Stronger Wisconsin Fund is basically one big giant campaign coffer which Robin Vos uses to get his preferred candidates into elective office. Now, just think about that for a second. The Speaker of the House forces new incoming legislators to donate to his campaign organization, which he uses to get his candidates elected to office in the state of Wisconsin. It's nothing more complicated than a vast pay-to-play scheme that is then used to get preferred candidates elected to office in Wisconsin. It wasn't actually put into practice until this year. On August 6th, 2024, the Sheboygan County, Wisconsin GOP issued a press release in which it said, and I quote, "The group in question, known as the Stronger Wisconsin Fund, officially registered with Wisconsin on July 12th and has reportedly poured to date over $450,000 into the Republican primary race. Their efforts have been targeted at candidates who are running against establishment incumbent Republicans. Evidence suggests that it is Robin Vos and the Republican Party of Wisconsin who are behind the Stronger Wisconsin Fund, orchestrating these false and clandestine attacks on conservatives who refuse to align blindly with the establishment," end quote. Does any of that sound familiar? Like the Redcoats all contributing to the Wyoming caucus to campaign against conservative Republicans? Maybe it's just a coincidence, but then again, in politics, there are no coincidences. That's just a little background on what type of guy Robin Vos is. And remember, it was Albert Sommers who said he was proud to serve alongside Robin Vos. If you Google Robin Vos's name, you'll find all sorts of articles about different things that he's been involved in and how he runs the Wisconsin legislature. Hardly any of it is good, and to a large degree, a lot of it is corrupt. And when you add in his involvement with the State Legislative Leaders Foundation, it gets even worse. This is where the Chinese Communist Party comes in. Stephen Lackas told the Cowboy State Daily that in the early 2000s, they held a conference with China, specifically the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries. Now, you have to remember that nothing happens in China that does not involve the Chinese Communist Party. They have a litany of different organizations, but really, they're all one and the same. And before we get too far into this, remember that Albert Sommers sits on the board of directors for the State Legislative Leaders Foundation. In addition to that, there are a number of Wyoming legislators, current and former, that are part of what the SLLF calls its Emerging Legislative Leaders Program. Those are, in 2014, Lloyd Larson, 2016, Tyler Lindholm, in 2018, Jared Olson, 2015, Stephen Pappas, 2012, Chris Rothfuss, 2019, Mike Yin, 2022, Trey Sherwood, and 2023, John Conrad. We'll get to John Conrad in a little bit. His story's changing faster than most people change their socks. In our original reporting of the relationship between the SLLF and the People's Association for Friendship, we told you about a number of different summits that were put on by the SLLF and the People's Association for Friendship. I want to go back to the article in the Cowpie for just a second, where Stephen Lackas and Trotsky Wolfson describe what exactly the SLLF is. and I quote from Stephen Lackas, "It's a neutral meeting ground where they know they're going to be getting straight information," he said. "We're not peddling a liberal or conservative ideology or philosophy. The SLLF was founded in 1972 and hosts forums for leaders in state houses across the country and other events for legislators and major corporations." Lackas said the basic purpose of the group is to make legislators better at their jobs, end quote. So why does any of that have anything to do with China? I'm pretty certain that the government in China bears no resemblance whatsoever to the government in Wyoming or in any other state in the entire country. There are a ton of people that helped me put this episode together. So let's take a quick break and get a word in from our sponsors. Today's edition of Cowboy State Politics is brought to you by Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. Are you looking for a little bit more room to spread out? Well, call my friend Rebecca. She just listed a beautiful 88-acre horse property in Lingle. The Diamond Bar Ranch has a 3,800 square foot home with lots of extras, like a riding arena and a shop. If you're looking for a peaceful retreat in a great location, call Rebecca. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. One more time, 307-699-3519. If you hadn't noticed, it's the middle of winter, and all of your fun summertime playthings are out getting snowed on day in and day out. It's not good for them, my friends. You spent a lot of money on them, and you should protect them. One easy way to do that is to call my friends Marcos and Jesse at Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532. They are the experts in metal building construction. They've been doing it longer than anybody else around, and they do a much better job than anybody else. So it doesn't really matter what type of building you've been thinking about or what toys you need to put in it. Call Marcos and Jesse. Again, their phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. And right now, they have a gigantic sale going on. It's a big one, and you don't want to miss it. So just make sure that you call Marcos and Jesse, and they'll get y'all squared away. So why the relationship with China? Now, of course, if you listen to Stephen Lackas, there isn't a relationship with China. Back to the cow pie for just a second, and I quote, Stephen Lackas, president of the SLLF, told the cow pie on Monday that his organization has no ongoing relationship of any kind with the Chinese People's Association or ever has with the Chinese Communist Party. And then, of course, he contradicts himself in the very next sentence. But anyway, it says, quote, that relationship has been over for a number of years, Lackas said. So let's take a look at their relationship that has supposedly been over for a number of years. From an archive page of the State Legislative Leaders Foundation website, and I quote, SLLF and Chinese People's Association for Friendship establish historic partnership. In December 2015, the State Legislative Leaders Foundation and the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries signed a memorandum of understanding establishing a new and permanent partnership between our two organizations. This partnership is the direct result of an agreement endorsed by the Chinese President Xi Jinping and President Obama during President Xi's visit to the United States this past October. During their meetings, both presidents endorsed the following language as part of a series of cooperation agreements. To enhance subnational exchanges, that's state legislatures, by the way, and cooperation between China and the U.S., the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries and the U.S. State Legislative Leaders Foundation reached consensus on establishing the China-U.S. Subnational Legislators Exchange Mechanism and plan to host the first China-U.S. Subnational Legislators Cooperation Forum in 2016. End quote. The definition of permanent seems pretty easy, but let's look it up anyway. To the 1828, permanent, to remain durable, lasting, continuing in the same state or without any change that destroys the form or nature of the thing, end quote. Let's just be perfectly honest about the thing. Permanent means permanent, or in other words, the opposite of what Stephen Lackas said. A little bit before that, Stephen Lackas is mentioned in an email obtained from the Hunter Biden laptop. This one was sent by James Bulger. Yeah, the namesake of the gangster James Whitey Bulger to Hunter Biden. And I quote, "Hunter, as you know, I was in Beijing last week. I was there because the State Legislative Leaders Foundation was sending an advanced team in preparation for a large program they will be putting on in October that will hopefully include over 50 legislative leaders from over 25 different U.S. states, as well as their provincial counterparts in China. Additionally, U.S. and China businesses will also be in attendance." Skip a couple paragraphs, and here's what you find. Quote, SLLF would like to set up a similar sort of arrangement, but instead focus on exchange between the state-level legislative branch of each country rather than the executive branch. It is on this point specifically that Steve Lackas, president of the SLLF, was wondering if he could just meet at your D.C. office and discuss paths forward. But all of that was so 2015, and interestingly enough, quite a long time after Stephen Lackas mentions the early 2000 relationship with the People's Association for Friendship that was mentioned in the cow pie. And don't forget, it was Trotsky Wilson that said, "I am just, quote, parroting, end quote, conspiracy theories." I've got news for you, Trotsky. You should have known that if I were to break a story like this, I've got it all documented. How dare you, of all people, accuse me of parroting conspiracy theories? The Cowpie article also mentions a 2022 article in the Washington Free Beacon by Chuck Ross. The reason we used that in our original reporting is he pretty much got it all right, and it was an easy reference for everything about this story we needed to talk about. But since Trotsky wants to accuse me of parroting, I thought I'd give you the whole story. Here we go, from a 2022 article on Fox News entitled "Hunter Biden Said He Would Be Happy to Introduce Business Associates to Top CCP Officials." James Bulger requested introduction from Hunter Biden, saying it's very important to our BHR initiative. And I quote, "In 2015, the year following the emails about Tongue," that was the email I just read you from the Hunter Biden emails, and it was obtained by the Free Beacon and verified by Fox News Digital, show that Hunter and his business partners helped an organization seeking to co-opt state leaders as part of Beijing's sprawling foreign influence operation to find an outlet in the United States while his father was vice president, end quote. That outlet was and is the State Legislative Leaders Foundation. The Fox News article continues, quote, "According to emails between April and July of 2015, Hunter's longtime business partner, Eric Schwerin, who managed the Biden's family finances and visited the White House at least 27 times during the Obama administration, arranged meetings between the State Legislative Leaders Foundation, the SLLF, and top State Department officials to help advance a partnership between SLLF and the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries," end quote. But again, all of that is 2015 and their permanent partnership. Fast forward to 2020. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo goes to Wisconsin and delivers his speech warning the Wisconsin Assembly and Robin Vos that their association with the Chinese Association for Friendship is a direct threat to national security. A couple of months after that, as if they were thumbing their nose at Secretary Pompeo, the SLLF and the Chinese People's Association for Friendship issued this press release on March 2nd of 2021. And I quote, "Chinese and U.S. local legislators vowed closer exchanges and cooperation at the conference of the 5th China-U.S. Subnational Legislatures Cooperation Forum on Tuesday. It was co-hosted by the Chinese People's Association for Friendship and the State Legislative Leaders Foundation of the United States. The forum was the first institutional activity of exchange cooperation between China and the United States to have resumed after the new U.S. administration took office." End quote. So now we're into the Joe Biden administration. So much for the whole Stephen Lackas, we've never had any association, or that was a long time ago in the early 2000s business. And don't forget what Albert Sommers posted on his own website, and I quote, "This humbug about the communist China is just the latest desperate fabrication of the Freedom Caucus and its surrogates have cooked up." End quote. Sure sounds cooked up to me, but allow me to continue, Albert. From efchina.org, that's the Energy Foundation of China, the China-U.S. Track 2 Dialogue, enhancing the implementation of the Sunnylands Statement, subnational and other issues. It was a conference held in Dubai on December 8th of 2023, and if you look at the agenda for the meeting, from 10:30 to 11, you have Levin Zhu, who is the visiting professor of management practice at Tsinghua University, former president and CEO of China International Capital Corporation, joined by Shen Jin, Director General, Department of American Affairs for the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries. And then on the agenda from 11 to 11:55, along with a whole bunch of people from different Chinese organizations, you'll find Stephen Lackas, President, State Legislative Leaders Foundation. End quote. But again, all that is old news, right, Albert? Now, obviously, Stephen Lackas lied to the cow pie when he said we've never had a relationship with the Chinese People's Association for Friendship, and that was a long time ago. Clearly, the cow pie did not do their research and did not even bother to do a Google search, which is where I found most of this. So now we're up to 2024. Wisconsin State Representative Janelle Brandtjen, and I had a great text exchange with her yesterday, issued a press release on April 29th of 2024 in which she said, and I quote, "Today, I wish to draw attention to the concerning ties between Speaker Robin Vos and organizations linked to the Chinese Communist Party. This relationship not only raises serious questions about potential compromises, but also poses a significant threat to our state's legislative integrity and sovereignty." Skip a couple paragraphs, and she says, despite the warnings of Secretary Pompeo in 2020, Speaker Vos participated in at least 2 trips under the sponsorship of CCP Associates, a 2016 trip to Wuhan funded to the tune of almost $14,000 by the State Legislators Leadership Foundation, and a 2023 trip to Copenhagen sponsored by the Energy Foundation of China. That's the outfit that had the event in Dubai. While based in San Francisco, this nonprofit organization is recognized for its links to CCP initiatives focusing on climate change and discussions between the United States and China. End quote. And then there's this little gem from the Congress of the United States House of Representatives on May 6th of 2024. James Comer of the House Oversight Committee writes, and I quote, "The CCP has a history of targeting America's political and business elite, its thinkers, and its various communities. A seminal report by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies explains that as a part of its unrestricted warfare, the CCP attempts to use its subnational government relationships to, quote, influence U.S. economic, technological, and narrative environments. Specifically, the party views American state and local officials as weak links through which it can advance its broader aims in the United States and exploit economic and national security vulnerabilities. This has led to what is referred to by both PRC and American diplomats as subnational diplomacy, which serves as a vehicle for the CCP to execute its broader political warfare goals against America." End quote. Now remember, Albert Sommers sits on the board of the State Legislative Leaders Foundation. The board of directors, that is. I find it highly unlikely, given all of these ties that I've listed in this episode between the SLLF and the Chinese Communist Party, or the People's Association for Friendship, whichever one you want to choose, Albert. I find it highly unlikely that he doesn't know anything about it. But I digress. 2 days after the House Oversight Committee issued that letter, the State Legislative Leaders Foundation scrubbed its website of any reference to the, quote, permanent agreement, end quote, between the Chinese Association for Friendship and the SLLF. Unfortunately for them, though, the internet is forever. Again, all of these documents will be available at cowboystatepolitics.com so that you can read them all for yourself. After hearing everything that I told you in this episode, a lot of the bills that Albert Sommers kept in his drawer make a whole lot more sense. You know, I couldn't figure out why Albert Sommers, even though he's a liberal, wouldn't want to restrict China from owning property in the United States. Why he wouldn't want to restrict the Chinese government from owning a chunk of property that shares a fence line with F.E. Warren Air Force Base. Why he wouldn't want to stop that. It might help us to figure it out if we knew that Robin Vos, the same year, did exactly the same thing. Apparently, practicing the oldest definition of an honest politician as one who once bought stays bought, Vos, to use a phrase from the Wyoming legislature, kept the bill in his drawer. In a later interview, Vos told an incredulous interviewer that I'm only one out of 132 legislators. I can't control what gets voted on and what doesn't. The truth is, Robin Vos controls the Wisconsin Assembly. If he wanted the bill to be voted on, he need only schedule a vote. It could be just an interesting coincidence, but on the other hand, there are no coincidences in politics. After everything I've told you today, no legislator in their right mind who cares about the state of Wyoming would have anything to do with the State Legislative Leaders Foundation. But it gets a little bit worse. The Wyoming legislature, specifically the Legislative Service Office, in their 2023 annual report, lists the State Legislative Leaders Foundation as one of the approved organizations that legislators can join. From the report, issued in December of 2023, and I quote, "The following apply to the information contained in this list. This list contains travel and per diem payments, actual expenses to legislators for out-of-state travel on official legislative business. The legislature participates in several organizations, such as the National Conference of State Legislatures, the Energy Council, the Council of State Governments, the Western Legislative Conference, the Education Commission of the States, and the State Legislative Leaders Foundation." Just one of those organizations that the Legislative Service Office lists as approved travel for legislators, without prior notice, by the way, with inextricable ties to the Chinese Communist Party, is bad enough. But there's another one. The National Convention of State Legislatures. You're never going to guess who the chairman emeritus of that organization is. Robin Vos. You don't suppose if we started looking into that organization, we would find the same ties that Robin Vos has everywhere else, do you? All I can tell you is wherever Robin Vos goes, China follows. To get a seat at this table, here is what you're going to end up paying. To be in the, quote, capital circle, it takes $50,000 plus per person. The platinum sponsor is $30,000. Gold sponsors are $15,000. Silver sponsors are $10,000. The big question is, where in Wyoming would that money come from? Well, I don't know of very many legislators that could fork out $50,000 or $30,000 just to be part of a Robin Vos organization. But to find the answer to that, we have to look at something called the feed bill, otherwise known as Senate File 2. And I quote, "There is appropriated from the general fund to the Legislative Service Office the following specified amounts, or as much thereof as may be necessary to pay the costs and expenses of the Wyoming legislature through June 30th of 2026. And if you scroll down about a half a page, you see a section called Annual Dues. National Conference of State Legislatures, $269,500. Now, of course, the SLLF isn't listed there, but if you look at Section 3, it says, and I quote, "The appropriation for out-of-state travel under this act shall be used to reimburse legislators for documented legislative travel and per diem expenses to attend out-of-state meetings in accordance with policies of the Management Council. In addition to other out-of-state travel authorized in Management Council policies, Management Council may approve out-of-state travel for legislators that furthers the interests of the state of Wyoming," end quote. And then, if you look at the list of approved organizations, you'll find the SLLF and the National Convention of State Legislatures. both of which are run by Robin Vos. There's one more little piece of this whole mess that I have to tell you about. You're never going to guess who the Wyoming liaison to the National Conference of State Legislatures is. Mark Quinter. Now, that name may not be familiar to you, but he spent 20 years as the head of the Wyoming Legislative Service Office, and now he's the director of the National Conference of State Legislatures Center for Ethics in Government. Maybe he should investigate Robin Vos for ethics violations. So you see, my friends, it's not just Albert Sommers that's involved in this. At the beginning of the episode, I read you all of the people in the Wyoming legislature, both past and present. The truth is, there are so many connections to the Chinese Association for Friendship that I don't think any of them could ignore it. Now, remember the three options I told you about in the very beginning for Albert Sommers? That either A, he doesn't know anything about all of these Chinese connections. I find that one pretty improbable since he is on the board of directors. Option number 2 is that he knows about it and he doesn't care, which is way worse than the first one. It means that he used the State Legislative Leadership Foundation, knew about Robin Vos, Stephen Lackas, and their ties to the Chinese Communist Party, and he didn't care because it padded his resume. Or the third option is that he absolutely knows about all of it and he's completely in favor of it. I'll leave it up to you to draw that conclusion. Now, there are several different rabbit holes off of this whole story that I wasn't able to cover in today's episode. We'll get to those in a subsequent story about this whole SLLF, Chi-Com, Albert Sommers, Robin Vos extravaganza. One thing is for certain, you definitely should not vote for anybody that has any ties to these organizations that we've talked about today. I've given you a mountain of evidence that shows you that they are absolutely tied to the Chinese Communist Party, no matter what Albert Sommers or Trotsky Wolfson with the cow pie say. The Cowboy State Daily did not check their facts, and they printed lies definitely from Stephen Lackas, and they may have printed lies from Albert Sommers, simply because they refused to do their research, or perhaps even worse, they were covering for Albert Sommers. And to top it all off, Trotsky Wolfson had the gall to accuse me of parroting conspiracy theories. As it turns out, he's the one that's parroting bullcrap from the people that he's covering for. Well, that's definitely enough for today's installment of the program. Have a good rest of your Thursday, and we'll probably talk tomorrow on another special edition of Cowboy State Politics. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.